Welcome. I want to welcome everybody here tonight. Some people in the room have already been able to engage in this input on this planning on a downtown master plan. We have the Walker Collaborative group with us. So I'm about to bring up Phil Walker, and he's going to take over. Well, thank everybody that's already done some stakeholder meetings. It's invaluable. Anything that you've said is great, and they're going to take back. And I've already had some feedback from some people who participated that they're already very impressed with what this group has come forward with and done some homework. So at this moment, I'm bringing Phil Walker ahead, and he's going to introduce his team, and then we'll go forward with this. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. All right. Thanks for being here, everybody. And I know you had other things you could be doing this evening, so we're appreciative of the fact that you're here to talk about downtown. So I'm going to do some quick introductions. I'm Phil Walker, as the mayor mentioned. I'm the leader of the consultant team. We've also got Keith Covington here. Keith is with Common Ground Urban Design and Planning. He's a urban designer and architect and planner based out of Franklin, Tennessee. We've also got Kevin Gunther, who is with Reagan Smith Associates. And Kevin is a landscape architect, urban designer, and also his colleague Scott, who's not at this particular, on this trip, but Scott will focus on mobility issues at his parking, which I hear could be a topic here to address, and transportation and so forth. We've also got Randall Gross. Randy is with Randall Gross Development Economics. He's a strategic planner and economist, so he'll be looking at all those issues that deal with the real estate market and economics. Also, kind of guiding us in the project is the Economic Community Development Team of the cities. And you can see all the folks listed here: Scott, Adrian, Christy, Jerry, Linus. And can you all raise your hands? Okay. I bet you may be familiar with those faces. So why is it that we're all here tonight? I know I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I like to remind people why downtown is so important. And first of all, you know, it really is a measuring stick. I mean, that quote that I've gotten a lot of mileage at, I always feel really provincial using a quote from the Tennessee and right where I live in Nashville, but I think it says all you need to know. In most American cities, you can sense almost instantly and instinctively whether it is living or dying by its downtown. I mean, it really is your kind of the measuring stick. And, you know, a lot of your history, you know, not Camp Blunt necessarily, but a lot of your other history started right here in your downtown. It's the institutional and cultural center of your downtown, you know, where local governments are and other institutions. That's why we're all here in downtown tonight. This is where the meeting is, obviously. Downtown is owned by everyone. When we do plans in other communities and it's for one particular part, let's say the northwest sector of Community X, you know who shows up at the meetings? The people that live or maybe have a business in that part of the town. When you do a downtown plan, people show up from all over because there's this sense of shared ownership that people have with the downtown. Downtown features the smartest growth in Fayetteville. I don't know if you've heard of the term smart growth. It's been used in the planning profession for a couple decades now, but it's on how to grow as a community wisely, how to be fiscally efficient and, you know, serve more housing units or more square footage of commercial space with the least linear length of infrastructure. Well, your smartest growth is right in downtown. That saves peripheral sprawl and green spaces from being developed over. So this is where your smart growth occurs. Downtown defines your sense of place. When you go out on a highway corridor, like let's say the Huntsville Highway, stuff looks pretty much like anywhere in America, right? It's you know, the term is generica. It's franchise architecture. You could be in Des Moines, you know, for all you know, as opposed to Fayetteville. But when you're in the downtown, it's distinctive. That really is your sense of place. And then finally, downtown is your postcard location. Can you imagine having somebody from out of town who'd never been here come visit you, and you wouldn't take them downtown? That probably wouldn't occur. So what we're going to do after that pep talk, to, you know, again, preaching to the choir probably, I want to tell you what we're going to do tonight. We're going to give you a little more background on the overall project. We're going to talk about our initial findings, and these are very preliminary observations from doing a little bit of homework ahead of time and just walking around today, and we'll dig into these issues a lot more later, but just kind of our initial observations. And then we're going to stop talking, and we're going to be listening to you and ask you about what you think the challenges are and the opportunities are for downtown. And then we'll talk about other communities you might have visited and their downtowns that may have some aspect that you think we can adapt to Fayetteville. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight. So what is a downtown master plan? It's a blueprint for the future growth and revitalization of your downtown. And it addresses a whole wide range of issues, everything from land use and buildings and roads and parking to economics, transportation, all those sorts of issues, all the things that kind of make up a downtown we'll be addressing. And the plan will ultimately answer 4 overarching questions. Number 1, where are we now? And that's sort of a snapshot of your existing conditions that we'll look at. Number 2, where are we headed? And that's looking at trends. What's happening, what's happened in the past, where does it look like you're headed on different issues? Number 3, where do we want to go? And that's where you come in. This is all about the community's vision and what your desires are for downtown Fayetteville, right? And then how do you get there? How do you get to that place where your vision is? And that's where the technical expertise of the team comes in on figuring out how we take what you see as the future of downtown and make it actually happen through our master plan. So why prepare a downtown master plan? Well, first of all, to build consensus. Because if you don't have consensus, you've got a bunch of different people going in different directions. Can you imagine an offensive coordinator for a football team sending out the team and they're all playing off of a different playbook? That probably wouldn't work, right? So that's why you need to build consensus so everybody's rowing in the same direction. Number 2, attracting funding for projects. Communities are always submitting grants, as staff can confirm, to try to get money from the state or other entities. And if you have a project that's part of a fairly recently prepared plan, it fits into a bigger picture, and there's been public consensus on it, you're way more competitive with communities that don't have that advantage. Gallatin, Tennessee is a great example. When they hired me to head a downtown plan, that was one of their primary goals from day one, was to get grant money. And they did. They landed a lot of grant money for different things because they had a plan. Number 3, enhancing quality of life. That's important, not just for the sake of your citizens. I mean, you should all want to have a high quality of life, right? But even with things like economic development, as far as attracting businesses and industry, it's not about just giving industry cheap land or great tax breaks. Nowadays, this box they check off is all about quality of life. And one of those things that they want to see is a vibrant downtown. They've got to be able to attract, talented, bright people who are going to want to live in that community. So quality of life is a really important thing, and having a vibrant downtown is an important piece of that puzzle. Fiscal efficiency, I talked about that a minute ago, about just the idea of trying to maximize the infrastructure you already have, the roads, the sewer, the water lines, and that sort of things, as far, trying to get your growth to occur downtown more than just on the fringes. And then finally, as a marketing tool, even though the plan we do, it'll probably be over 100 pages, we try to have a pretty high level of graphic quality, but we'll also do a summary that'll serve as essentially a marketing piece when you're trying to sell downtown, trying to get people to open businesses. It'll be important to that. So those are just some of the reasons why you'd want to have a downtown master plan. Now, as far as the purpose of this project, and most of you can probably read up there, I'll just hit on the first sentence. This came right out of the request for proposal document that the city issued in hiring a consultant team. It says the process will conclude in a cohesive document that echoes the goals and desires of the community while helping to direct future decision making as it relates to the orderly growth, revitalization, and sustainable development of the downtown. So that's what the goal was. And there are 4 major steps to this whole project. So right now we're in task 1, project kickoff and research. And we started the day in meetings with the committee, got a tour, walking tour of the downtown. We had a couple of stakeholder meetings today. We're going to have a few more tomorrow, spend more time out in the field and do more research. Randy, particularly looking at economic and market conditions between now and our next trip. Task 2 is the charrette and concept plan. Now, a charrette, I don't know if that's a term you're familiar with, but it's a tool that planners and designers have been using now for a couple of decades. And I describe it as an intensive multi-day brainstorming session that highly engages the public to generate ideas to be the springboard for a plan. So what happens in this charrette? So it's going to be 4 days. We'll show up on the first day. That evening, we're going to do a public workshop. And we basically deputize residents, citizens, to be planners for the night. We break people up into teams. Each team of maybe 6, 7, 8 people will be at a separate table. There'll be a big map of the study area. There'll be colored markers that relate to different issues, and we'll walk you through a process so that each team comes up with their own concept plan. And at the end of that exercise, maybe hour and a half or something like that, we'll come back together and each team will take about 5 minutes to present their ideas. So that's the springboard for us to then take those ideas along with our experience and expertise and come up with a concept plan. We'll work feverishly. We sleep a little bit, but not much. You get your money's worth, I'll put it that way. And at the end of that 4th day, we'll have a public presentation and present the concept plan. And that's just our first stab at the plan, right? And after we present it, we'll leave all the time we need to get your feedback. There are going to be things you like. There'll be things that you think maybe we ought to rethink or revisit. And then based on that input, we go away, we put together the plan document, we submit it to the city, they'll look at it, recommend edits if we need to do that, and then give it back. It'll probably be posted on the city's website so people can scrutinize it. And then we come back and present that plan. And then we also, during that meeting, it's still a draft. We get more feedback, go back, revise it again. So that's kind of the process. And of course, we like to put a lot of emphasis on the implementation component of the plan, because no one wants to do a plan that sits on the shelf and gathers dust, right? We want to see this thing implemented. Even though implementation isn't something you flip on a switch and it just happens, it's incremental, it's over time, but we obviously want to see the plan implemented. So let me talk about the study area briefly. There are really 2 different study areas. There's what we call the primary study area, which is in red right here. That's the core of your downtown. It goes about 2 blocks out from the square in all 4 directions, okay? So that's our main focus area, but we also have, and you can maybe see it in blue here, what we call the secondary study area. Now, we're not going to get into as much detail, but we think that area is really important. For example, let's say we determine that your downtown is eventually going to build out and you need to actually expand your footprint of your downtown. So where in this area would that go? What makes sense? Are there fringe areas that could be redeveloped in an urban form so your downtown literally grows? So we'll be looking at that. Or the connection, coming across a river, that's a gateway corridor. You've got gateways from different directions, and you want to, we'll look at how could people have a sense of arrival that they've reached downtown Fayetteville. So those are the study areas, and this is just a blow up. It shows you a little bit more of the primary study area. And I want to touch, I think it's really important to understand the history of a community, especially how it physically developed. And by the way, is Mr. Cashin here, Jim Cashin, by any chance? Have you been to his website? It is phenomenal. He has got this great collection he's assembled digitally of images. And I don't know if I've seen any community your size that has the rich wealth of historic photos that you have. It's just amazing what's there. So anyway, all the historic graphics I'm going to be showing you are from his website. But downtown was laid out. It was platted in 1810. The courthouse is, I don't know about the very first, is Mr. Ham here? Okay, Mr. Ham could answer this this question. The very first log structure that was there for 5 years, I'm not positive if it was also in the square or off to the side. But anyway, the others have always been in the square, right? So you've got 1815, a brick structure. It was probably Federal, was the architectural style just because of the period. It was replaced after the Civil War, 1874, by this Italianate brick structure. That was replaced in 1970 by the current structure that you have. One thing that really blew me away, Sanborn insurance maps. Those date back to the maybe 80s or 90s, and those are all available too. And what really surprised me was the change of street names that occurred sometime between 1907 and 1914. When you look at 1914, the new names suddenly appear with the old names in parentheses. So sometime during those 7 years, on the north side of the square, Market became College Street, right? On the south side, South, which made sense, South, became Market. So that's a weird thing. So Market actually moved a whole block, right? On the east side, Water became Elk, and on the west side, Hyde became Main. So really fascinating. Now, you've also been impacted in your development by a series of disasters, as you're probably aware. And I'm probably not listing them all here. These are just the ones that I happened to learn about doing a little bit of homework. And so tornadoes, there was an 1850 tornado, and apparently that one did a lot of damage. 1890, 1909, someone asked me earlier today about this photo. That's the Motlow House. Does that ring a bell? Okay, that's 1909. And then 1952 was another tornado. So, and I don't know if there have been others. Fires, now this is not unusual at all for downtowns. You know, there's always the fire, great fire of this or that occurred. 1885 was your first one on the west side of the square. 1916, the Rambo Garage, which from what I can tell is right adjacent to downtown, if not part of it. 1944, in the upper right, the Pope Hotel, which is right around the corner from the square. 1950, I don't know if these were two separate fires. There was a feed store and a hardware store that both burned, and I don't know if it was part of the same fire or not, but anyway, that was in 1950. 1979, and the reason we're in a fairly new building is because of the 1979 fire on the east side of the square. And then 1986, Higgins Funeral Home burned. So there may be others too, but anyway, those are the ones I found. And then finally, floods. Now the good news is most of your downtown's out of the floodplain. So they knew what they were doing when they located your city here. But just to the immediate south and part of that peripheral study area, you obviously had a lot of flooding, 1909, 1929, 1949, 1969. I think all those impacts eventually, the stone bridge that went out, I'm sure it took a beating over the years from floods. And there's probably been other more recent floods as well, but those are just some of the floods. So anyway, fascinating history, and I'm going to turn it over to Keith to talk about starting off with natural features.
Hey everyone, I'm Keith. I'm also serving as the photographer, so if you see me running around, I'm just taking pictures. It's great to be here. As someone who has grew up in Nashville, lifelong Tennessean, this is actually the first time I've been to Fayetteville, and there's a lot of, and you hear planners sometimes say this, and it kind of gets a tired phrase, but you know, you have good bones in this community, and you have not only good bones, but you have a lot of historic architecture and buildings and what we call a urban fabric that is really great and something that you can really build on, and you should be proud of that. So kudos to you for that. Oh my gosh, I should have my readers to see how small this is. All right, so what I'm going to do is just run through a few of our initial findings about the existing conditions. Before we put pen to paper, and we certainly have not done that yet, because we need input from the community, the people that live here, work here every day, and then we also need to kind of do our own sort of research. And so we will we'll take the mapping information that we have, and we create a series of maps. You'll see us out, if you didn't see us today, touring around, taking photographs. We'll do more of that tomorrow. But I just want to share some of the initial things. Like I said, like Phil said too, this is very, very preliminary. I'm going to talk about something first, though, and I would love to use a previous slide that Phil had, but I'm just in effort to keep moving here. So this is our overall study area here. And one of the things that I notice already is that you have a great block structure. In other words, the length and width of your blocks is really great. But what's interesting is that unlike a lot of communities that have a network of alleys, you don't have as many of those. You have a few alleys here and there and so forth. But what's interesting is the streets that are just to the north of the square and just to the south of the main blocks around the square. There's actually, those streets are really narrow, so they almost function like alleys, you know. And so there's a lot of a great opportunity. And what happens with those slightly larger blocks, and we've already kind of discovered this today, is that there are these wonderful kind of spaces that happen actually behind and between buildings too. And believe it or not, you know, you don't have to have a building in every single spot in your community and in your downtown. So there's a lot of opportunity to kind of think about these spaces and think about, you know, how does that make Fayetteville unique from some other places. But this map is really more about some of the natural features. One of the first things that we noticed today was the fact that we're up high. I mean, yes, you can see these blue lines, this blue shading here represents the floodplain. There is a little bit of the 100-year floodplain that kind of dips up, but it really doesn't touch that primary study area of downtown because you're up high. And you think, well, that's a good thing, you know, build on the high ground. Well, there are a lot of communities, in fact, ones that we're working in right now, that the entire downtown is in a floodway. I'm not talking about a floodplain, but a floodway. So anyway, I mean, you know, this is a good thing for downtown. You do have Norris Creek and the Elk River here. And that is not directly adjacent to downtown, but there are opportunities to take advantage of those areas. But from a slope standpoint, a topography standpoint, while the square is kind of on that high ground, you know, the other areas, it's you know, there's a little bit of a gradual roll that is typical of Tennessee, and but it creates a very kind of interesting system of streets. When you look down Main and you look down some of the other streets that come right off the square, you really see that nice roll of the topography. Now, from a land use standpoint, and we created this map based on the GIS information that we had, and we need to go out for these areas and sort of verify some of these things because, you know, we're not quite sure that the land use is quite associated with things. For instance, I'll give you the perfect example. You know, we're kind of in the City Hall building, but it's actually shown as commercial land use. So, you know, there's some things that we'll be going through to check, but you can see that there is a core of commercial type development that's around your square. Duh, okay, that makes sense. But what happens is almost immediately beyond that first block or those main streets, it transitions to single family, and in some cases some very large, historic, beautiful single family homes. So that's kind of an interesting thought too. Of course, you have institutional uses like churches and government buildings sprinkled out throughout your downtown, like so many historic downtowns, but it's just something to consider. And then you've got this large area that's you know, some industrial area that's down in this area, but right here, you know, where it's a lot of encumbered by the floodplain, you know, there's you know, not as much development there, or in the future it might be very restricted in terms of what development could happen there. So there's just some things that we found. Now, talking about the buildings, and I've mentioned a little bit about that and how you have good bones. This is also a great graphic from Jim Cashin's website showing the transition, the evolution of buildings in your downtown over time. From, you know, the 1890s where, you know, a very beautifully detailed building, but also very simple at the same time. And then this picture in '79 of the same building where, you know, larger signs have been added, as well as the idea of painting brick and things like that. And then in 2013, well, you know, these historical windows have been replaced, and we have some awnings there, and the shop front is still the same from the 70s. But there's definitely kind of an evolution of that over time. But you also have some historic buildings that are very well preserved, or they've been rehabilitated in a wonderful manner. And you know, when you follow recognized historic preservation standards, you really are preserving the character, what makes Fayetteville unique. You are preserving that character. And there's also opportunities, if they're designated, federally designated, for a potential for federal investment tax credits. And that can be a key tool for the revitalization of certain buildings. And also, when you have really well-preserved buildings, they become models for the other buildings that need that help. Obviously, you have some historic buildings that need some enhancement and rehabilitation. Original storefronts might have been replaced over time. Transom windows, those are the windows that are usually above doors and above storefronts, can be covered up. Upper floors are, unaltered. They're left in their current state. But the good news is that when it comes to preservation and rehabilitation and those things, a lot of those alterations are reversible. It's not something where you have to go in and take something down. In most cases, they can be rehabbed pretty easily. And then this is something that we see in so many downtowns. When those upper floors were less utilized and things were not looking as good, there was just this idea, we call them slip covers, of just covering up half the facade, and it really changes the character. And this is actually one building. Now, I believe it's 3 owners now, but this was designed as one building. When you look at the cornice, you can really see that. But it'd be interesting to see what would, if we pulled that off, could we get back to some of that original character? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to talk about streets and parks and open space.
And parking.
And parking. Oh, how could I forget that?
Thank you, Keith. As been mentioned before, it really is a pleasure to be here. I hail from Murfreesboro, so I get to drive down the pretty route on Shelbyville Pike and experience, some of the surrounding beauty that kind of wraps and envelopes Fayetteville. So it is a pleasure to be here. And as was mentioned, we have not put pen to paper. We have not crafted any conclusions or ideas, so we're very much interested in hearing what your thoughts are as we go through the process. Related to streets, it's similar to architecture. You have, I think the term was used, very good bones. You've got a good street network that has retained itself. You have two-way streets. You have on-street parking that's established in a lot of areas. All those things are very positive things to start with. So I'm going to say that we have a good framework to work off when it comes to the streets. Of course, the bypass is a factor in terms of less truck traffic, and that is, there's always there's a plus and a negative that comes, right, with your bypass. Fortunately, you still have some main routes coming into your downtown, and your commerce and traffic is still moving through downtown, but that brings trucks with it. So we want to evaluate just how we might handle that and some ideas that might come relative to truck traffic. And then the existing streetscape is also a good framework. You've got a lot of room between your building facades and the curb. And I, as a landscape architect, I get really excited about this, because what brings people to downtown? Well, it used to be your downtown was your place of commerce, right? That was where business was done. That's where people would come to interact more for the commercial and commerce and business side of things. What's interesting in this day and age, what's happened, and I think this is a very positive thing, downtown has taken on more layers to it. Because now it is a place of residential opportunities, and it's a place for recreational entertainment opportunities. So the downtown has really become that place now where people recreate and gather and socialize just as much as it is a place of commerce. The reason I say that relative to your streetscape is the street is the largest amount of public space that any community has to work with. So it's going to shape how people experience your city and how people experience coming and going and the time that they spend here almost as much as any other factors. So it's really important how we're going to shape that out, keep it human scaled. There's lots of room there. We could talk about some potentials of getting some dynamics going on in that public street that aren't just about automobiles, but that are about people, maybe some outdoor cafe spaces, maybe some more landscape elements, amenities. All those things can be discussed. So I'm excited about that. The other thing is, the street trees that are there have some maturity to them, but we want to visit that and talk about, is this really the best scenario? Or are there some things we can do to improve visibility? Or are there some things we can do to improve the experience of the landscape? And then also, as I mentioned, the pedestrian ways. I was very encouraged to see that you've got your ADA crosswalks in. I think that's money well spent. It's really important. But beyond that accessibility also comes the potential for, there again, how do people experience the streets and their crossings, and are there ways that we can enhance that experience? I've heard it said that marketing is what brings your people to visit your town and maybe to either come back and want to invest in it or maybe even live in it. Branding is what they experience while they're here, and it's going to bring them back. And those open spaces like your square and your streetscapes, those are your chances to really brand an experience where people are going to want to come back. Parking, everybody loves talking about parking, right? So we're going to look at just crunching some numbers that are based on typical needs of space that you would have with some of the residential, the business, and the commercial areas that you have, the institutions, the county courthouse, etc., to look at your supply and demand. But I think the thing to remember about parking downtown is it's not a pure math equation. Parking in your downtown areas has a lot to do with not just pure number of spaces. It has to do with how you manage and operate those spaces. It has to do with how you share the uses of those spaces. And it has to do with how you identify those and communicate it to the people using the spaces. So those, I think, are some tools just beyond the pure math that we can start to look at when we're talking about parking. And then, as I mentioned, that public square is a great place. There are opportunities for gatherings to occur in this downtown area. I know you have some great events that already happen. And I think we're going to want to make sure to design and plan for future events that will bring the community together downtown. All right, Randy Gross, you're up.
Oh no, it's numbers. Oh. Come on, people, stay away.
See what I get?
Well, most consultants worry about the crowd heckling them. It's pretty dangerous.
Thanks, Phil. I'm Randy Gross. I'm the Economic and Strategic Planning Consultant. I had the opportunity to meet some of you today. And I'm so excited to be here, not only because you have a great town, but also because now I can say I've worked in Fayetteville, North Carolina, Fayetteville, Arkansas, and finally Fayetteville, Tennessee, in my home state. So I'm glad to be here. The best one, that's right. My role in this project is really to provide input on some of the existing economic conditions, the real estate conditions that help inform some of the planning, and to provide some strategic recommendations also that can help inform the plan as we move forward. And we're just getting started, so there's not a lot of information to provide at this stage, but I just wanted to talk about some of the key findings so far in terms of your economy, the economic base, and your demographic base. Some trends that I looked at in terms of population, because your population base, your household base, those things underlie the prosperity of downtown to a large extent, in addition to tourism and other sources of market support for downtown. But in terms of downtown, or in terms of the city as a whole, population had been falling between 2000 and 2010, but has since been recovering. So population is on the upswing since the recession, and that's a good sign. The county's population has also been increasing, but your share of the county has been declining. So that means there's more population growth outside of the city. Another notable change is that you have a growing Latino population, and I think that's important because it's part of your market and part of your marketing strategy to appeal to that growing population base. So that's an important part of the marketing strategy. In terms of households, and it's important to remember that the basic purchasing unit for retail, for example, is the household unit. Households also fell between 2000 and 2010, but have been coming back. So you've seen this change in terms of demographics locally, and those households the household growth helps support downtown retail. One thing that has been a bit distressing is that income levels have continued to fall in real dollars. So even after the recession, household incomes in Fayetteville and Lincoln County have not fully recovered. They have been going up a little bit, but when you count in inflation, they're still declining. So we have to look at what is happening there in terms of economic growth and the kinds of jobs that are being created and those kinds of changes. Your incomes in the city are about 25% lower than incomes in the county as a whole. So you have a wealthier community outside of the city limits, but this county is part of your market, your natural market. So that shouldn't affect who is buying, who is a consumer for downtown. So those are important aspects. Another thing that's not mentioned here is that you have a growing commutation base to Huntsville. You're sort of tied increasingly to the Huntsville economy. You've always had people, I think, that have gone, to the military, types of jobs that are there and the contracting types of jobs that are there. But I think that's a growing part of your economy, and looking at how you are becoming more of a bedroom community in some respects to Huntsville is an important part of your market, and how that affects downtown is important. In terms of your economic base, you have about 7,700 jobs within the city of Fayetteville. And that, again, had declined during the recession. Nationally, it declined as well, but it's been increasing again. Manufacturing is your largest industrial sector, accounting for almost 30% of all the jobs in the city. And your manufacturing base has been increasing by about 2 to 2.5% per year. So that is a very good sign. Those are good jobs, especially if you have a high school diploma. Those are good paying jobs, and so it's important to look at that as an important part of your economic base. And that also impacts on the consumer for downtown. Other key sectors in your economy include retail, education, healthcare, accommodations and food service, which are hotels and restaurants, for example, and government employment. But as you can see from the chart, manufacturing and retail, along with education and healthcare, are important parts of your base. And I'll just point those out. There's manufacturing up there, retail, education, and healthcare. You can see those are very important components. The city has about 85% of the jobs in Lincoln County. So you are the job generator for the county. A lot of that has to do with where utilities are located and zoning and what is allowed within the city versus the county, but you're the job generator for Lincoln County. And you've had a declining share of the jobs in the county, except in manufacturing, transportation, finance, and education. But still, this is where the majority of the jobs are. And again, going back to commutation, about 86% of the people who work in Fayetteville live out of town. So those manufacturing jobs, the finance jobs, the hotel jobs, 86% of those are held by people who don't live in Fayetteville. But 60% of you, people who live in Fayetteville, are commuting out to work somewhere else, including Huntsville, but also other places. So there are people moving out and people coming in every day, commuting back and forth. And so I know we've talked a lot about retail, but the office component in downtown and the ability to attract those kinds of jobs to downtown that professional workers would hold. Some of you who are commuting out of the city or out of the county, if those types of jobs were available in the city, that might be an opportunity for downtown, because those types of jobs tend to attract talent when they're located in a downtown area. So that's something we need to think about in terms of not just retail employment, which is a very important part of it, but also to help retail, creating more jobs in the downtown area. Finally, just initially looking at some of your downtown business mix and sort of what's happening in the downtown. Again, you have, I don't want to use the word bones again because it's been used quite a bit. You have great bones. But you also have a great mix of existing businesses, fantastic businesses, and a lot of fun here that you don't have in a lot of other towns your size that I've worked nationally in. So I think you should be very proud not only of the buildings, but also of you as business people and the kinds of things you've done to build up a great business community. There's some terrific destinations and anchors that you already have in the downtown that a lot of other towns wish they had, like the Lincoln Theater. My goodness, to have a first-run 2-screen theater in your downtown, you know how unusual that is for a city your size? Very, very unique. So you should be very proud of that, but we'd also need to protect it, to help it grow, to help it prosper into the future, depending on, maybe the same people may not own it in 50 years or 30 years, but we want to make sure that it prospers into the future. Restaurants, you have a great mix of restaurants. A lot of them are focused more on the lunch trade, but you do have a good mix of restaurants. I don't think I've seen this many little luncheonettes, little cafes in one town square in my life. I mean, it was 6 or 7. But they all looked busy today when I walked by, so that was a great sign. But you need perhaps a few more full-service restaurants that are open at night to cater to the nighttime crowd. And we have been hearing that from some of our stakeholders that we've been meeting with. And certainly those kinds of restaurants and other activities help support the theater. And the theater together with the restaurants creates a destination. So that's a very important aspect to what downtown can be. Then you have the museum. You have a city-county museum, an event center, which is a very important anchor for downtown. You have an arts center. And then, of course, you have city and county government, both headquartered in the downtown. And thank goodness you still have your courthouse downtown and have not moved it out to some suburban location, because that drags jobs, including all the law firms and everyone else, out of downtown. So to protect downtown, you've done a great job of keeping those jobs here in the downtown area. You have a good mix of convenience uses, from florists to, on the periphery, some gas stations. You have a drugstore, which is fantastic to have downtown, and even an espresso bar, I believe. Is it still open? Just making sure. You have a lot of antique stores, a furniture store, bookstore, gifts, apparel, women's apparel boutiques, which is great, because women generate about 78% of retail sales. So appealing to the consumer, to women, female consumers, is a very important part of building your downtown business mix. And you even have a pet store downtown, which is great. And then you have services, hair salons and other services. So you do have a good mix of existing businesses, but building on that will be part of the question. Hearing from you in terms of what you'd like to see will be very important. And finally, just in terms of some existing opportunities and challenges, you have some existing vacant buildings, some of which are on the market and for sale, so that presents an opportunity, but others that are not for sale. They're being held for whatever purpose there may be long term, but having that big vacant space in the downtown is hurtful to the other businesses. Another thing is that you might have some ground floor office space, which is, you're a courthouse, you're a county seats. You're going to have law firms and other firms that have offices downtown, which is great. Over time, we'd like to see some of the office space migrate to upper floors that are taking up some of the downtown retail space. But for now, it's a great employment mix. And finally, being proximate to Huntsville cuts both ways. You have all those jobs in Huntsville, and it's a generator of day trippers and other people who come up here for shopping and that sort of thing. They have the mall, which I think one of the reasons that your downtown has been relatively successful and has the cinema is because you don't have a mall right in this area. You have to drive the 30 or whatever miles to Huntsville to go see a movie otherwise, or to eat out. And so that's kind of a trek if you don't want to go that far and that sort of thing. So that's kind of saved you in a way, but also it's a competitor in some ways to you, especially as you become more of a bedroom community. So those are some of the opportunities and challenges we should all be thinking about as we move forward, and the purpose is to hear from you as well. That's very important. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Randy. And we're almost at the point to hear from you. I've just got a couple more slides on initial findings. By the way, I noticed that if you get too close to this thing, you get this weird fuzzy feedback sound. but we got to be close enough that we're recorded. So I don't know if this is the right spot. But anyway, just a couple of last things on policies and programs. So this map, this shows your existing zoning, right? And here's a key, color key, and you've basically got 5 districts that impact the study area. Let's start off with C1. That's your central business district, and that's around the courthouse square area. And that's the only place you have that district. It allows for mixed uses. It includes upper floor residential. You are miles ahead of a lot of particularly smaller communities by already allowing for your zoning to do upper floor residential, because a lot of communities amazingly don't even allow that. So, and we recommend that they change their zoning. You don't have to change it, you're already there. Also, very wisely, you don't have minimum lot sizes or setbacks, which is good for a downtown. You actually want to have flexibility. You want to have buildings that come up to the street, not a setback. So that's a good thing. C3, which is general commercial district, that's all this kind of lighter, almost like a pinkish color, whatever it is. And it's very similar to the C1. It allows a mix of uses. Again, it allows upper floor residential. However, it's a little more auto-oriented, and it actually does require, for example, a 35-foot front setback. So, for example, if we decide in this area, going down here, that your downtown needs to grow, that's something that we're going to want to revisit and probably recommend you not require a front setback, because you want an urban building that comes up to the street, right? Not one that sits back with parking in the front. So that's something we'll look at. When it comes to your residential districts, R2 is the medium density residential, and you've got a pocket of that there and some other places, and it allows for single family detached and duplexes, and it requires a 35-foot front yard setback, which we'll have to look at to see if that really is the best distance, and a 75-foot lot width. Now, most older neighborhoods, turn of the century neighborhoods, the lot widths are closer to 50 feet in width. So we'll take a careful look at your existing historic development pattern to see, hey, maybe you need to decrease that minimum width. Then with the R3, which is high density residential, it's that color there, like there's just little pockets of it, but it has basically the same types of uses as R2, plus multifamily and shallower front setbacks of 20 feet. And then you've got just a little bit of industrial. Luckily, it's I1, which is less intense than I2. And it's funny that I noticed in looking at the floodplain map, it's almost the same area as where the floodplain actually is in the study area. So anyway, that's something we'll look at, is what changes to zoning. Historic districts, and there's different types of historic districts I'm going to talk about. You've got multiple National Register historic districts, and you've got 2 that are part of the study area. You've got, in this kind of red, I don't know if you can see it, but it's a large part of the north of the square area. It's the Mulberry, Washington, Lincoln National Register District. You've also got a much smaller one, the South Elk Street District down here in blue. The Mulberry, Washington, Lincoln one was designated in 1984. It's mainly residential. It's about 500 acres and 164 buildings. The South Elk was designated a few years later. It also is primarily residential, much smaller. It's 160 acres. A National Register District comes with no protections, actually. If you own a building in a National Register District, you can go out tomorrow and tear it down, assuming you get the proper city permits, unless there's federal funding or licensing involved. So it really doesn't provide protection. It does, however, provide potential for the federal investment tax credit. I think Keith touched on that earlier. For if you do it following federal preservation standards, you get this huge tax credit, 25%. For all the amount that you spend on it. So that's really important. You've also got something that I've never run across in Tennessee, and the Tennessee Historic Commission told me about this, and that is your Certified Local Historic District. Now this is, again, a national type thing, but it's not National Register. The only difference, though, you get all the benefits of a National Register District, except there's a couple of types of grants that you're not qualified for, but the same tax credits you could get anywhere in the square. So that's another big plus. Now, there's something else, historic zoning overlay districts. which you have on the books in your zoning code. As many of you might recall, maybe 7, 8 years ago, there was an effort to have a local historic district. And what a local district does, it actually has teeth. It actually offers regulations to, to regulate how people treat older buildings. It can prevent them from being demolished. I mean, there are a lot of exceptions where it might be demolished, but it regulates demolition, new infill development, alterations to anything you can see from a street. But that effort was not successful. Now, I think it's something worth re-looking at. I do not recommend that if you don't have a substantial majority of property owners that are supporting a local historic district's adoption, I don't recommend you go forward, but there are a lot of benefits to looking at that, and I think it ought to be revisited. One of the things that the last effort included was regulating paint colors. And I always say never regulate paint colors. It's reversible, it's cosmetic, it's the straw that breaks the camel's back politically. Don't go there. And so, if you were going to revisit it, I'd have a smaller area geographically, focus on downtown, and I wouldn't try to regulate paint colors. But anyway, that's something we can look at. So those are the different those are programs or policies. Now, you're really, really fortunate to have a Main Street program. A lot of communities don't have Main Street, and Main Street's part of a federal, a national and state program for revitalization focused on historic preservation. So the organization consists of, you have a manager, obviously, a board of directors and various committees. You've got a lot of different programs that are provided, services focused on downtown. The funding structure is kind of cobbled together. There's different levels of memberships. The city kicks in $15,000 a year. The county, about half of that, a little more than half. And then, they have events that raise money and grants and so forth. But it's based on what they call the Main Street 4-point approach. Organization, design being anything like physical planning, economic vitality, and then promotion. And when we do a plan, we always think in terms of the Main Street 4-point approach, because I've seen some communities do a downtown master plan and all they look at is physical stuff. Well, guess what? You can put in brand new sidewalks, but after the novelty wears off, that's not going to revitalize your downtown. It may be part of a bigger strategy that can be important, but just looking at the physical realm and not considering economic and market conditions and other things is always a mistake. So just like the Main Street program that's comprehensive, our plan will do the same thing. So now we get to rest your ears, and we're going to hear what you have to say. And so the first very general question is just what sort of challenges and opportunities, and they can be in any order, do y'all see for downtown Fayetteville? So if y'all could, and I think the way we're going to do this, because we're recording this, I guess if you tell us your comments, I'll try to summarize it, repeat it back on the microphone. So who wants to go first? I know you're not too shy here. I should have planted somebody. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am.
No, you're fine, too. I think one of the problems or could be the actual structures themselves and some of the conditions that they're in.
Okay.
Like you showed those two pictures. One is that had the slip covers on the front. Well, one of them is because the front facade is about to fall off.
Mm-hmm.
So, how can we as a community, because redoing these buildings is expensive. And I actually own a coffee shop that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got a quote today for $9,000 for flooring. So when you're talking about a building that needs true structural help, that's a problem when you
Yeah.
how do you do that?
Right. And so the question is, when you've got buildings that may be in a deteriorating condition and it's really expensive to fix them up, how do you overcome that challenge? So just a few things. One is, there are grants and we can suggest incentives. There's the investment tax credit that when we had our meetings today, I could tell that a lot of people weren't familiar with that program. So that's something we need to broadcast more. Also, when a downtown, and Randy, you might want to add to this, but when we see a downtown start to kind of rise up and become more vibrant and economically healthy, then it starts to attract more dollars. It's more viable to actually make that difficult investment because there's, the tenants are paying higher rent or whatever. So it's one of those things that over time, as you become more successful, those kind of hurdles financially can start to be overcome. But good point. Next question or comment. Yes, sir.
There was a study a few years ago, downtown planning study, that showed an pedestrian overpass from the front of this building over to the courthouse. I see pedestrians from the courthouse to the municipal building to the courthouse, waiting. 100% on jaywalking because they're not going to the traffic light. But that may be something you might want to put in the study.
Okay, and so if you didn't hear it, some years ago there was a study and it showed a pedestrian overpass between the city hall and courthouse, and that's something we'll take a look at. A lot of times when I see that, it's areas that are really dangerous with traffic, and you're right, people probably do jaywalk. If we can program folks to at least not feel the need to jaywalk, then I think they can safely cross, but we'll certainly take a look at that. It can be expensive, though, to build that kind of thing. Oh, that's right, because you got to, good point. The grade issue. So when you do something like that, it has to follow the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, which means you got to have a ramp or an elevator, which is really expensive. And to do the ramp, if you don't have much of a grade difference between the 2 points, it means like a really long, is this correct? Really long, 1 inch increase in height for every 12 inches of, But anyway, it's really difficult to pull off. But we'll file that one away to look at. Yes, sir.
In mentioning studies, you might do well to get our Action 2020 study from 1988, which, and also there's a gateway study that was done. I don't know whether they're a copy of this.
Okay.
And then there's a 1970 T-Dot traffic and parking study.
Okay, and I see Keith taking notes. So there are several different studies that we need to get our hands on to see what was looked at before. The Action 1988 Action 2020.
The last thing is, you mentioned Huntsville several times. For me, Huntsville is both a liability and an asset in the fact that it provides jobs, which helps our per capita income. The liability is the people that work in Huntsville, either clothes in Huntsville, either food in Huntsville. We don't get that sales tax dollar. I, for one, would like to see the name of the Huntsville highway changed to something else, because every time we mention Huntsville, we're promoting Huntsville. Now, I would come off of that, and Huntsville would be willing to change Memorial Highway, Memorial Parkway, Fayetteville Highway.
I like it. That was a lot to encapsulate back here, but Huntsville's a liability and an asset. They provide jobs, but a lot of the people that work there spend their money there. And maybe we can change the Huntsville Highway to something else. Especially if we can get them to, I guess, swap names or whatever. But we'll give it. We'll look at a new name. But that's a good idea. And there was somebody else. Yes, sir.
Further, what she was saying, I moved back here a few years ago, and I know this is a private sector type thing, but the prices that these people are asking for the square property, that is deteriorated and needs these expensive repairs, and even the rentals is, for the state we're in, they're astronomical. If it was already a bustling area, and you were going to come in and you're going to make your small fortune, that would be one thing. But the fact that it is in this economic shape it is, that's why there's so many empty. We priced both rental and purchase property, and even looked at one with residential above to move in there to have a business downtown. And it's just, it's not feasible for the shape they're in. Like I say, if they were brand new or you knew you were going to be able to make that money to pay it. But some of these businesses have to clear $300 or $400 a day of gross profit just to pay your rent, let alone pay your salaries, your sales tax, your utilities. That's not going to happen in this area. And I think that's part of the reason there's such a large vacant area. So some folks have been watching too much HGTV or something.
Yeah.
To piggyback on what he's saying, in this property, they want $300,000 for a building. I don't know what they think people are gonna sell downtown to be able to afford a $300,000 building, and that's if it's, you know, say it's $120,000, and then you have to put $150,000 into renovations just to bring it up to code, to be able to do whatever it is you wanna do with it. I mean,
Yeah.
when you're talking about restaurants and nighttime, well, here's the problem. As a restaurant owner, I have to pay somebody to be there, and nobody comes. I mean, you have some established restaurants that probably do pretty well, but a lot of the restaurants would go under because they can't afford to pay people to stay till 8 or 9 o'clock at night. I'd love to be open till 8 or 9 o'clock at night, because I think I would get some customers, but I would have to pay people to be there. And, you know, I'm just saying, so I understand what you're saying, and I think that's a great idea, but how do we fix that?
Yeah, so just real quick, while it's still in my mind, really two different issues. One is that the price, both to purchase and to lease space, buildings downtown seems a little out of whack given the condition and so forth of the downtown. And then what you're saying is, yeah, it would be great to keep businesses open later, but you can't afford to if you're spending, you know, more for employees and so forth, utilities, and you're not able to make the sales at night. So, point well taken. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I know the museum, and I'm in 2 stores, retail, selling, and probably most of the people, the majority of the people that visit the stores and the museum are from out of town. And we don't have a sign anywhere, nowhere. They just put one up on the Interstate 65, the Chamber, which is good, but we don't have anywhere to get anyone to downtown. You come in on any bypass. There's not a sign that really means anything to say that there's a historic downtown.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just read an article from an old town we lived in years ago, when the Tourism Bureau celebrated its 100th anniversary. The only thing the Tourism Bureau did was sign. They didn't do anything else. That's all we need. We don't need anything else here at Summers.
Okay. Oh, yes, Randy's got and the comment was all about the need to have directional sign to get people to downtown Fayetteville.
I was just going to say that I'm going to be speaking with a lot of the merchants while I'm here, and one of your merchants said the sign should read, "Fayetteville is the best wrong turn you'll ever make." He said that's because 90% of his customers make a wrong turn off of one of the roads to Lynchburg and end up downtown by mistake, and then they're so happy and surprised to be here.
But we're right on the way to Lynchburg,
Right.
off of
Right.
65,
Oh,
and,
yeah.
you know, why are we gonna have a sign that says, "Hey, stop here before you get drunk" or something?
Well, or after you get drunk.
Well, on the way back, stop at hotels, you know.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of,
Yeah, we're not dry, we're not dry.
yeah, there you go. There's an advantage, competitive advantage, right? You know, a lot of communities will do those brown cultural signs that say like historic cultural district or something like that. And I think you have to get the state to sign off on that. I don't know if you know anything about that, Kevin, but anyway, we'll definitely look into figuring out how to make that happen. Because I think when it's a brown sign and it's cultural, it sounds like, oh, it's historic and maybe they're shopping. And, you know, a lot of times it's how you label it. Maybe not. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I have a store on the square, and you showed my picture, and I'm the one that has the cover and I agree. And I bought that building 4 years ago. I've owned the business since 2007. That was covered up sometime in the 50s.
Right.
I would love to see it uncovered one day, but like somebody did read the comment, the building next to me, it's going to fall.
Right.
It's going to fall. And there probably will be some damage to my building, but tragedy here, 2010, we had a major fire. When SERS burned, not 2010, 2018. Yes, and we were a destination town, and 75% of our business was from out of town. We no longer have traffic, just few, and our businesses are going down the tube because we don't have signage, number one. Our tourism doesn't do a very good job about helping get people in here. So only about 25% support us local of the people that live here. Because number one, they drive across the state line to Huntsville. Taxes are 5%, ours are 9.5%. So that makes a lot of difference. So that's an issue with our community.
Yeah. And, you know, we heard about SERS. That's come up several times just in our couple of meetings today. And I think the challenge for us is to figure out what other anchor uses that are going to draw people can be viable here. And, you know, whether that's a single business or, you know, a combination of businesses that create sort of a critical mass that draw people. But that's one of the challenges that we'll have to try to figure out. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I always have a lot to say. I apologize. Those who know me know that. So I've been thinking about this. Now I've been out of town, we've had other meetings. But a lot of towns, you say we don't have a mall. Well, we could have a mall. And it could be downtown Fayetteville. So you have places like Bridge Street that are outdoor malls. Why couldn't our downtown be an outdoor mall where people come and they walk and they go to shops and we have cool little shops, we have cool restaurants, you know, and we have lots of things. So why couldn't we build Fayetteville as a downtown mall?
Yeah, and when you say building Fayetteville as a downtown mall, do you mean from a physical point of view, or just sort of treat it and think of it as
a downtown mall?
Yeah.
Where people are walking and
Yeah.
you know, just seeing things. Does that make sense?
No, it does make sense. And in fact, we finished recently a downtown master plan for Natchez, Mississippi, and we started thinking of downtown as an industry. And we started crunching the numbers. Look how many employees are in this industry, and look how much this and that. And when we got people starting to think of it more as an industry, suddenly it's like its importance, you know, its significance seemed to kind of elevate a little bit. So I agree with what you're saying as far as thinking of it as a mall. And I think that's part of the reason why you're still as vibrant as you are. I know we can improve things a lot, but compared to other places where we work that might be this size that have a mall, you know, you're doing pretty well. So
to be a mall.
Yeah, no, I understand.
My idea is people go to Bridge Street like it was something, you know, because they have some cool restaurants and some really expensive stores or whatever. Well, why can't our downtown be a Bridge Street?
Sure.
Where it is a destination where people want to go and hang out and do stuff. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Let me go to her right now, and then yes, ma'am.
Kudos to Fayetteville for doing some things in the evenings. There's the First Friday. There are a few things that the city, I live out in the county, the city is trying to do, and I just love that. And then there's the Jingle Mingle. My husband and I are Mrs. Claus and Santa Claus, so we come in and we do that. But I think there needs to be something that sparks the nightlife. Like the Bridge Street idea. Huntsville is catering to our young professionals more. We're losing those people. They have the axe throwing events, which is awesome. My son does that. And there's this sky golf. There's the escape rooms. And I think Fayetteville needs something to draw in that nightlife more. It doesn't have to be something huge, but it does have to be consistent. And I think that's where we drop the ball, is in the not being consistent.
Right. And it may, oh, I'm sorry, keep going.
The Bridge Street has the little water pads, you know, with the kid, you know, the little sprinkly things, and so in the summer the kids, and that has the kids doing that, and mom is shopping.
Yeah, yeah.
One other thing that, and I don't know if this is the place for this one, up until just a month ago, I was the property manager at a low-income community, and that is all pretty much that Fayetteville has for apartments. There's Fayetteville housing, and then there's low income. And you know, I have so many people coming from Huntsville saying, oh, your rents are so cheap up here, but they didn't qualify because there's an income cap, and being a tax credit community, and that those tax credits go to those owners. It has nothing to do with Fayetteville. Fayetteville doesn't get anything out of that. So maybe some other kind of a, you know, not keep bigger, just something else, something that's a little bit,
More market rate, not, yeah. Well, so two things, let me just real quickly, just to summarize, there were two issues you brought up. First of all, as far as more nightlife consistently, I mean, there have been efforts or events. We worked on a project a few years ago in Russellville, Arkansas, and it was a fairly dead downtown. And after our plan, one of the developers got interested because we kind of did this graphic showing what a potential building could look like if it were rehabilitated. It was a pretty large old 1911 bank building on the corner. This guy buys it, turns it into a really, really nice sports bar, 54 screens, and that one business has totally changed the dynamics of downtown Russellville to where people go there at night, and it's allowed other things to spin off and so forth. And now parking challenges, which is good, that's what you want. But that one use, and I'm not saying a sports bar necessarily here, we've heard a lot of people mention a microbrewery. That could be really successful in a place like this. So we totally agree, like if you can find at least one business that's open at night and starts to draw people, then good things can happen. Your other comment was on the need for other types of residential downtown that aren't subsidized at a market rate, and we think that's really important. That's something we'll focus on. And what we found is not only getting more people living in your downtown and around it, it's not just the market support they lend to businesses like restaurants and stuff, but also it gives downtown a more lived-in atmosphere and feels safer. And so you may have people that live out in other parts of the town that don't come to downtown often, but when they start seeing signs of folks living downtown, they see people up on balconies, it makes it that much more attractive. So that's the other important part of more residential. Yes, sir.
And another thing to me, I have to do a lot of travel on small roads, is it seems we have a disproportionate amount of realty, law offices, things that don't attract people from out of town on our square. And from the successful squares I have seen, driving through and stuff, there's a lot more entertainment, restaurant options. I know our courthouse is here. I know Fayetteville's offices are here. They need to be close by, but they're also not anything that somebody from Huntsville or Tullahoma or wherever is going to drive down here, walk around at 7 o'clock at night, and there's maybe one shop open. We got 4 or 5 antique shops. I think there's 3 barbers on the square. We need some diversity there. And again, I realize this is private sector stuff. People got to make that decision, what they're going to spend the money on. But the only way you're going to get people is to have more people. People attract people, like you said. They feel safe. They feel fun. I've been to some little towns. I've stopped on the way back just because there were so many folks out there. I'm like, what's going on? They're having something. A hot dog cookout or a little bicentennial celebration, but there was so many folks there, it looked like a good place to stop and have lunch or whatever. A lot of these little towns, I can't even remember their names, but it was inviting. And when you come around here at 7 o'clock at night, the only thing that's open is the theater, and you come around here on Sunday, is there anything open on the square on Sunday anymore? Not that I could recall. And I drive by the square at least 2 times a day.
Right.
It doesn't invite me, even as a resident, to come other than the occasional meal or movie.
Right, exactly. And your first point was about all the sort of less active uses on ground floors like offices and so forth. That was something Randy mentioned, right. And it's kind of an old principle in downtown revitalization that you want more active uses like dining and shopping and stuff on ground floors. You want offices and housing on upper floors. A lot of these communities you go to, they may have offices and housing above you and you wouldn't even know because the ground floor has the retail and dining and that sort of thing. Right now you're in one of those situations where you're probably fortunate to have ground floor space filled up to the extent it is, but if downtown can revitalize and start to do better, then it may make sense to rehab some of that empty space or underutilized space on upper floors. So, you know, that's kind of where we want to get to. Yes.
Fayetteville has a very unique position to where it has a lot of farmers around, and with a vibrant downtown, like a good farmers market, an organized farmers market, covers a lot of these aspects: the economic aspect, the social aspect, the health aspect of having any kind of income, you know, higher income, lower income people have access to healthy food that's locally grown, or, you know, within 100 miles or so, you know. And there are many studies that show that that is very vital for a community, also for the community spirit, to have a really well organized farmers market that's in a very visible spot, and preferably covered to where the weather is not such an impact. And we have several locations in the downtown area where that would be very feasible to do for not too much money. And just a thing that to throw out as an example, like for instance, SERS came up, you know, that lot's now empty. If we put solar panels there that cover it up, we provide energy, and it provides shade for the cars that park there all week, and then on certain days of the week we can have a farmers market or other events happening right there, or in another similar location. But I'm just thinking of that one because it's so close to downtown. It's walkable, it's very usable, and it will bring this farmers market concept. We have a farmers market right now, but actually it has a bit of a bad reputation because a lot of the people that are selling there are reselling. They're not like real producer market, and then people lose trust in the people they're buying from. But if it's an organized farmers market that is, you know, like all the talk so far has been very urban oriented.
Right.
But we have tons of farmers around here, and we have some very good farmers markets within an hour and a half that have vendors that come from here. And they go up, you know, they get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to their farmers market. They don't need to go that far. They can go right here in Fayetteville.
Yep.
I speak from experience, and so it's when there are events right here in Fayetteville, we get a lot of traffic from the Huntsville area, and even from Nashville, even from Murfreesboro. One of you was from Murfreesboro. We get a lot of traffic from that, and farmers markets are, to a lot of people, still an event. But if we have a weekly, all-year market that's preferably covered, well advertised, well organized, with good vendors that are trustworthy, that you know that it's good food. I mean, it will not only improve the health of the local community, it will encourage like cooking classes, stuff like that, people actually learning how to be healthier. And so it's a vital part of this plan.
Yeah, amen. You know, farmers markets, like you said, there's a lot of benefits, you know, social, economic, health, all that kind of stuff. You have what it takes to do that. And we've seen farmers markets be a key ingredient to really revitalizing downtowns. We worked in Wilkesboro, North Carolina. They had kind of like a fledgling farmers market, but we made that kind of a centerpiece of our plan to take an area. They also had, you know, parking challenges, needed more parking. So we looked at an area that was used as a parking lot. We wanted to keep it as a lot, but you can creatively design places so that it can be used as a parking lot during the rest of the week and transition into a farmer's market. It does take a lot of organization. It takes a high level of organization. There are all sorts of, if you go on the internet, there are organizations that just support farmers markets, you know, as far as like, you know, international, national, and there's all sorts of how-to books out there to run a really top-rate farmer's market. But yeah, we'll it's on our radar screen, and we'll definitely look at that. Yes, sir.
The thing Fayetteville needs, SERS has been mentioned many times. It was an anchor store. It brought people in from outside. But you can't go out to eat in Fayetteville, have a glass of beer, have a glass of wine, have a drink. There's no Uber, there's no Lyft, there's no taxi. And a DUI in this town, one drink, you've got a CDL. I mean, it does one drink, you're over the limit. And that keeps people in. And it's not here in this town.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That we talked about that earlier today in a meeting as well, that there's no rideshare program as far as Lyft, Uber, which makes it tough for restaurants. And yes,
There
ma'am.
actually is.
Oh, there is?
There is somebody registered with Uber and Lyft, yes.
Okay. And I've got a little app on my phone. Maybe I'll test it out just to.
Well, it just, now, but here's the thing.
Okay.
She doesn't sign up very often because there's, not a lot of use. But, and I told her, go to bars and go to places and advertise from this time to this time. But there is somebody that lives here in Fayetteville who has signed up for it.
Okay.
But she's just started. So.
I tell you, if they just did a little ad over urinals I tell you what.
Well, yeah, exactly.
That's what you do.
There is one thing I want to say about the restaurants, and I'm sorry, but my brother works in Fort Payne, Alabama, drives back and forth to Fayetteville every day. I used to work in Decatur, drove back and forth every day. We get home, and please don't take this critically. I don't mean it critically, but I am kind of criticizing. But there's nowhere to eat. I mean, I can only eat so much fried food. I mean, honest to God. And I know studies have been made to get a steakhouse in here or something of that nature. And we have some restaurants, yes, that offer steaks and they're good. But like some of them are more of a bar scene, so it's loud and sometimes you don't want to go to a loud place. Sometimes you just want to go to a nice place and have a glass of beer and a wine and or maybe even a mixed drink, and it not be so loud that you want to shoot yourself in the head.
Yeah, I was at Tammy's last night. It's pretty loud.
You call the name, I didn't. But then you've got other restaurants that serve good food. The steaks are pretty good, but they don't serve beer, they don't serve wine. And I'm not talking about getting a place you can go and get sloshed. I'm just talking about, we're grown people. In other places, you can go get something to drink, unless you want to eat Mexican. I mean, my God, I eat in Mexican restaurants to be neat. And I like Mexican food.
You have one drink now.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that is, that's how downtowns, years ago they served your daily needs, right? Now they've evolved because you have a lot of your daily needs are out on highways. So downtowns have to evolve into entertainment districts as much as anything. So that's something that we've got to address, and that's a great point. And you know what I want to do right now, and we're going to hang around when this meeting breaks up if you want to talk to us. But it's already gone on almost an hour and a half, and I want to get to our last question. And that is, what about other downtowns that you visited in other places? Maybe it's somewhere you lived for a while or you've just visited, and there's some aspect. Now, we're not trying to replicate any other communities downtown. Fayetteville needs to be downtown Fayetteville, but we've all seen aspects, maybe farmers markets, we talked about that maybe we could adapt for Fayetteville. So give us some ideas on places you've been, things that you like. Yes, ma'am.
Franklin, Williamson.
Franklin,
I also
yep.
know that's the wealthiest
Yeah.
in Tennessee.
Slight
but
advantage.
I think I think it's really memorable every time I go there.
Yeah, so downtown Franklin's a model, and just kind of in general, right? Like all the shopping
Yeah,
and
just
dining.
what is it that's so charming? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Murfreesboro, I live there, and I am from Nashville, Tennessee. But every Saturday from June to October, the gentleman said he's from Murfreesboro. They have their farmer's market at 8 o'clock when the courthouse bell rings at 8. They start selling at noon. I think that is great. And like you said, they can have like a beer, or in Columbia is another one. They're able to sit out on their sidewalk and have a beer, and they're not criticized, and they're not looked down on. And like it's, other people have sim wines and things like that. That's just been a very hard pushback for here.
Right, so
Got-
Murfreesboro, Columbia are examples of places you can sit out, outdoor cafe, enjoy a beverage and that sort of thing. Absolutely.
And
Yes, ma'am.
Huntsville does that same thing, and I think if we can get those people that are driving from Fayetteville to Huntsville to work and staying down there and doing that, we need to get them back home. And so that they're staying in, sitting on that.
Yeah, Huntsville.
I love the sidewalk cafes.
Yes, sir.
The biggest little town around here is Lynchburg. They have a very small population, but they really have to go to tourism. And I think we should build on what we have here. We have a slaughter, home of the slaughter. We have Camp One coming in.
Yeah.
We should have home of Camp One. We get a lot of people from Hartsville going to Jack Daniel, stopping off at Camp One.
That's a great idea. As far as, obviously you can't be Lynchburg, but you can take advantage of Lynchburg's traffic. The Slawburger, Camp Blunt, which is about to get a lot more publicity with interpretation and stuff, that the Tennessee Historic Commission is going to provide. So yeah, that's a great idea. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Yeah, restaurants, man. For sure. Yeah, we're all talking about building up the downtown, we're talking about restaurants. I love a brewery. Is part of the scope of what you're doing, do we have the infrastructure in the ground to do it?
Okay.
Or is that in your?
Well, sort of. So what you're talking about is like sewer, water, that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
We've not heard of, so far, of course, we just got here today. So far, we haven't heard issues on utilities. Now, they are going to be tearing up the sidewalks sometime in the next few months and put in new utilities. And most places we work in, I mean, plenty of places have put in microbreweries, things like that, where infrastructure is not a limitation. So, I don't see that as really being a problem, especially if they're going to upgrade around the square as it is anyway. So, but that's something, if it turns out we think that's an issue, we'll certainly, account for that in the plan. Yep. Yes, sir.
One thing that Fayetteville has that I feel like we've all noticed, we have a lot of eyesores, especially in downtown. Sequatchie Concrete that is no longer in business. I'm a landowner 2 houses away from that. That start remodeling, that's a real ugly place.
So I take it it's a quote abandoned business. It's no longer in operation, but there's a lot of stuff out there that.
And not just that, but I mean I get it that was an industry in town. It provided jobs, whatever. What I do for a living, I work in a fabrication shop. I'm a welder. That's not the kind of thing that I feel like downtown really needs.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of waste, a lot of byproduct. That's not a beautification thing.
Yeah.
That's a dirty industry.
And as far as industry goes, I mean, one of the things that I talked a little bit about your zoning before. We usually take a look at your zoning ordinance for your downtown zoning and look at what's allowed and what's not allowed. And oftentimes we'll recommend things that are currently allowed not to be allowed, like some kind of industry that's not very complimentary to a downtown. And then we find other things that aren't allowed that should be allowed. I mean, you already allow upper floor residential, but there are oftentimes things. Here's a great example. If someone did want to do a craft brewery, you'd have to allow for some kind of a low-level, not intensive industrial that would fit under the zoning for. But there are ways to have performance standards that make sure they're not, impacting negatively surrounding property. So that's one of the things that we'll do. We'll look at the zoning, see what's allowed and what's not. Now, if it's already there, it's grandfathered in, but maybe there could be some kind of time limitations on how long it could be in that condition. But that's a good point.
I think what he's referring to mostly is now a lot of these things are inactive. There's no industry business or whatever there. They finally tore that old dealership down after being empty for 15 years and the roof falling in. On our major way into downtown, there's still some things down there that are a major eyesore that, I don't know who owns them or who's responsible, but that either need to be tore down or revitalized to something that fits, the plan.
And what's tricky is when we do a plan, there's usually nothing that mandates anybody to do anything as far as a property. I mean, we have ideas and recommendations, and you can change zoning. Even if you change zoning, you're still grandfathered in, right? Until you decide to do something with your property, or, you know, expand something or whatever, you can still exist. What we'll have to look at is to see if there are any kind of provisions in your ordinance that says, okay, when a business is no longer a business, there's certain things. I mean, signs are a great example. Almost every ordinance says when the business is closed up for 6 months or a year, whatever it might be, then the sign's got to come down. That's an example. I mean, we can look at that for certain uses and so forth. Yes,
And we can also look at incentives that can help leverage redevelopment of those sites or reuse of those sites. So that's
exactly.
something that is a positive way of getting someone to come in and redo the site.
Yes.
Mr. Field, and some of the older people that have been here, been around longer than me can help with this, but originally, and I'm not defending the way Sequatchie looks, that is one thing that has been on my radar for sure. We are working on that to get that eyesore covered up. But some of those industries and businesses were built on the railroad. There was a train that went through there, so originally the tracks and everything have been taken up. I do remember that as a small child, but that was all built down in that area. Mr. Dick would be familiar, Mr. Bill, with what all went through that area at the time, and the train came right beside that property. But yes, I have to agree totally with the fact that it does look bad. It is an eyesore, and it is on our. Yes.
Other towns have kept their train.
That's right. That's exactly.
And yes, sir. And we'll just take a couple more comments, and then yes, sir.
Like everyone else here, I'd love to see a nice steakhouse. We courted some of those people, and here's the downside. You don't have the skilled labor to serve my clientele like I need to have them served. Because your clientele, your waitresses there only serve water at your meat and threes. That's all. And he said the other thing, you don't have the rooftops. The other thing is, we hear Goodwin is leaving.
So let me ask you, so the comment was about the fact that, it'd be great to have a steakhouse here, but they won't come because they don't feel the people, potential employees are skilled enough and not enough rooftops. Was that a chain or franchise that you're talking about?
Sort of.
Yeah, because, and that's one of the things, when it comes to business development, usually it's really, really tough to attract chains because they have those numbers. They have certain numbers they look at, and if you don't fit it, and that's why the best thing to do is to get locally owned, someone who's going to start a new business, or find someone who's got a steakhouse that is not part of the franchise or chain, and they may have a successful one in Tullahoma or wherever it is, and see if they'll open a second one here. We find more success doing that than trying to go after something that's a chain. It's someone who's already successful somewhere else and try to lure them, if not relocating, at least opening up another business, here in Fayetteville. So I think that's probably the best. And I'll take one more question or comment. Yes, ma'am.
So you have a primary and a secondary plan that you are going to develop. Does your secondary plan, how far does that stretch? Does that go down Huntsville Highway?
So it goes, I'm trying to think, we've got a lot to go through here, but let me see. Okay, there we go. So, here's the courthouse square, and I can't see the road names here, but, this is about 2 blocks out from the square, and it goes west all the way to, I don't know if anybody knows that landmark.
Cemetery on the north.
Oh yeah, there's a cemetery.
Yeah.
And then, the creek, Norris Creek runs along here. And then it goes south to the river, okay? So that's really the area. And again, we're focusing primarily on the core area, your historic downtown, but looking at least at some of the issues for the secondary area. So, and last thing, I just want to tell you what our next steps, and we're all going to hang around if you have specific things you want to share with us. Oh, by the way, that's one of my favorite photos I found from Mr. Cashin. Can you look at that poor little kid? I mean, looks, and there's another photo that goes with it. It really is way the heck up in the air.
Jim Davidson that provided most of the photos on the website.
Right, yeah, and he's credited there, James, yeah. Right. And, wow, so, you know, y'all are survivors. You come from good stock that gets by. So we still got a little more of task one, which is a research we'll do. Next time we're here, we don't have a date set yet, but we'll try to get one pretty soon. And we'll come back for the charrette, and that's that big workshop we talked about. We'll be here 4 days, and give a lot of people a heads up for that, and maybe get it on the calendar, and present the concept plan, then go back, put the document together, provide that, and come back and present it. So those are all the next steps, just to remind you. And again, I want to thank you for being here, because I know you could have done other things tonight, but it's so important to get your input. We like to meet, and this is day one for us, but we like to start hearing from people immediately as to what their ideas are, and it's real helpful. So thank you again.